Yeah, boy, I'm Slim from the Fantasy Football Auctioneer. You can find me on Twitter at Slim for MVP. This is the first in my series of division breakdowns for the premium content subscribers, people that are essentially buying our draft kit. So if you're listening to this, I just want to say thanks for purchasing a subscription and supporting what we do. Hopefully, we can help you do well in your draft this season. I also figured I'd try something different with our draft kit and move away from some of the written content and go more with an audio focused type media. Not that there's anything wrong with written content, but I just thought it kind of breaks up some of the reading a little bit. And Blister, at Mr. Blister on Twitter, he's been busy putting out tons of written content. He did all of his AFC breakdowns, as well as a lot of buys and sells and players to avoid and things like that. And that's all available through their premium subscription as written content. So I thought that maybe I would try and get a mix of both types of media. So I would try and do most of my stuff with audio. So if you have any feedback, you can feel free to hit me up on Twitter. If you have any questions about anything that you hear on any of these, by all means, hit me up there as well. Love questions, love getting some dialogue there. Just so kind of a couple things in these breakdowns, I'll try and talk about some players that I like and maybe dislike, usually in relation to their auction values at this given time, since it's the main indicator of if we will roster a player or not, oftentimes in auction drafting. So this being July 4th, since we're Canadian, we celebrated Canada Day on July 1st. So most of you probably right now are crushing a smoky, maybe a cob of corn, definitely a few pints, I'm sure. And here I am in my basement setting up some podcasts for you premium subscribers who are probably getting drunk right now. So yeah, don't anybody blow off their fingers like Jason Pierre-Paul, who, it's ironic, his old team we'll talk about tonight. So with that being said, I thought we'd start with maybe the NFC East. So we'll kind of take the low-hanging fruit first. We'll start with the Dallas Cowboys. And with that, what I mean with the low-hanging fruit, we'll talk Zeke Elliott. So right now, his AAV, his average auction value, is $58. Now, probably not a terrible price, considering, he's probably in your top 5 running backs. For me, he's my RB2 in PPR formats, and I have a hard time putting him ahead of Todd Gurley based on Gurley's usage in the passing game. The reason I have him ahead of Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson is, one, I'm unsure about Le'Veon Bell's contract situation. Does he plan on holding out at all? So until I know for sure there, I'll just bump Zeke slightly ahead of him. And with DJ, I just don't know what the Arizona Cardinals offense is going to look like. A little bit of turnover there. What the offensive line could be, what the quarterback play is going to be. I'm not a big fan of Sam Bradford. So I could see DJ's production taking a slight hit. So that's kind of a couple reasons for me having Zeke this high. Another reason I like him is I think Dallas is going to plan to use him a heck of a lot. They don't have much at wide receiver, it looks like right now. We know that they have a very good offensive line. And if you look closer, Dallas's numbers, they're typically one of the run heaviest teams in the NFL. In 2017, they had the 4th highest rushing percentage. And, I don't see why that changes at all. They have no wide receivers, really. They haven't filled Jason Witten's void. I don't see why they would throw any more than they did last year. Jason Garrett has proved to be a pretty we'll say coach. They keep it pretty bland. They run kind of like, because they are so rush heavy, they run a style of offense that we're maybe used to seeing in the 90s, not so much the 2000s, where it's more pass friendly for a lot of teams. I've heard rumblings on Twitter that some beat writers and things could see Zeke approach somewhere like 400 touches, which if that's the case, that that means a lot of usage, a lot of chance for fantasy points. He's not going to do much in the passing game, but I think with the volume that he's going to get on the ground, if he can just stay healthy and play 16 games and not do anything stupid and get suspended and miss any time, the fantasy points should be there without much question. So I think he's a pretty safe bet at the RB position, especially when you look at some of these guys like, Le'Veon Bell's had a lot of injuries, and we mentioned the contract situation. So I just think he's pretty safe. I'm not saying he's a good value really at $58. I think that's a pretty decent price. It's fair. And if you have him ranked as high as I do, and as your RB2, we'll say I would expect you probably gonna have to spend $60 to get your RB2, or maybe even more. You often see Todd Gurley go for more than that. So it's not a terrible value if you or not a terrible price if you can get Zeke at something like that. If we look at the Cowboys and maybe a bargain, I think the one that jumps out to me is Allen Hurns right now. His AAV is $3. I think $3 for what could potentially be the wide receiver one, and granted a low volume passing offense, is still unbelievable value. In fantasy football, we want to chase volume and touches, and especially late in a draft. And if you're spending $3, obviously he's coming late in the draft. And I mean, to me, there's a lot of upside there at that price. If he is their wide receiver one, then, obviously that's phenomenal value. And if he can approach, even 900 receiving yards, sprinkle in, 5, maybe 6 touchdowns. If you start looking at who else is on that roster, I don't think that's out of the question. You got Michael Gallup. Well, he's a rookie. We typically try and fade a lot of rookie wide receivers. Terrence Williams, he's had, his off the field incidents. Plus he's pretty mediocre. He's replacement level. I think he doesn't jump out to me as anybody who's willing to steal a large volume. Cole Beasley, we saw him kind of not get involved too much last year, so he's kind of a meh option to me. Tavon Austin was a signing that some people got excited about, and we heard Dallas Cowboys coaching staff talk up, but I don't think he's a real consistent threat to get any sustainable fantasy production. He might get the odd week here and there, but I don't think in any given week he's going to be used in the game plan that significantly. And then, like I said before, there's no real Jason Witten replacement. So I think a lot of those targets are going to be vacated as well. So I like I said, if you can get Allen Hurns for $3, I think you have to jump all over that late in your draft. So if we switch gears to the New York Giants, one thing I would caution with the entire Giants, any of these players coming from the Giants, is that you have to be a little bit cautious of their values, mainly because of the quarterback that they're tethered to. Eli Manning, we know, has not looked the greatest in the last couple of years. I think you could see some of these guys, especially in the passing game, take a little bit of a downturn. I'm not saying guys like Odell Beckham and Evan Ingram are going to be completely undraftable or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But I just think if you start getting into a bidding war to get guys like that, you maybe need to just pump the brakes a little and just kind of take a step back and reassess and think, okay, is there guys that I can get for, 5 or 10% cheaper that will give me the same or almost the same production here? And are you buying these guys at their ceiling? So just a couple things to think about. One of the guys I'll talk about, I guess mainly just because everybody's talking about him, is Saquon Barkley. Right now his AAV is $50, which again, I think that's a pretty decent price. I kind of wanted to talk about him mainly because there's been some talk on Twitter. Any of you are on Twitter, and I recommend that you should be. There was a comparison floated around to LaDainian Tomlinson's rookie numbers, which for reference, were 339 carries for 1,236 yards and 10 touchdowns, and then 59 receptions and 367 receiving yards, which phenomenal production for a rookie running back, especially in a PPR league, catching 59 passes. And I guess the comparison was that would it be out of the question to see Saquon Barkley do this same thing? LaDainian Tomlinson was a player that Saquon was compared to often during the pre-draft process with some of his measurables and some of the skill sets that he possesses in the field. So yeah, I mean, I look at a guy like Saquon at $50. That puts him kind of just outside the top 5 RBs. He's right around then kind of like the RB6, RB7 at a price like that. Kind of lumped in with Kamara and Kareem Hunt. And then there seems to be a little bit of a dive to Melvin Gordon and Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette types down that way. So I would say the price is fair. Like I said, Kamara, Kareem Hunt go for right around that at this point in July. My question is, I just don't know how many rushing attempts he's going to get when you start comparing him to that LaDainian Tomlinson season. Like, I highly doubt he gets over 300 carries. I think the receiving stats are probably going to be fairly comparable. It wouldn't surprise me if he catches around 60 balls, maybe even a little bit more than that. But I think so. Like, the price right now is pretty fair. A lot of the times what we see with players like this, though, rookies especially, later on as the summer goes on, their prices could start to creep up. So if he starts getting kind of into those mid 50s, again, I think you really need to take a look at your rankings and see how he fits in and if he's really worth spending that much for you or with your budget. If we look at a bargain on the Giants, one that kind of stands out to me, and I think this is going to be a common theme, is these lower end wide receivers. So Sterling Shepard is the bargain for me. He's at $6 right now. Again, a wide receiver 2 on his team. But I think there's a lot of these players in this range. And I think what happens is because there's so many of them, their prices are going to get pushed down a little bit, devalued, if you will. And it's going to create values if you pick the right guys and you can, seem to pull some of these needles out of the haystack, so to speak. Especially when we start seeing a lot of guys are going to be spending in drafts big money early on some of those top end RBs. It's a pretty common draft strategy for a lot of people now to try and get one of those top 6, top 7, top 8 running backs. They're going to cost. There's no doubt about that. So then that's going to affect those owners' budgets later on. They're just not going to be able to afford to buy guys like these potentially. So especially as they're wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5, where if you went a little bit cheaper early, this might be something for you. Some of the things I liked about Sterling Shepard are, what if Odell holds out? I mean, that's obviously been kicked around. You never know with Odell Beckham. I kind of believe he won't hold out, but if he does, then obviously that could create some more volume for Sterling Shepard. Even with the emergence of Evan Ingram. So what a defense is going to do to cover Odell, Ingram, Saquon catching passes potentially out of the backfield. There's going to be a lot of weapons there in that offense. And I think if you're a defensive coordinator, Sterling Shepard becomes the guy that maybe you focus on the least oftentimes when you're game planning. So that's pretty beneficial for a player like him. And I'll admit, I was skeptical on Sterling Shepard last season. I didn't own him anywhere. I didn't think that he was actually going to be able to do much. So I'll give him his due. And I think that he's someone you want to target this year. If you look at what he did last season, he was on the field a lot and he had a 91% snap share. He was targeted in the red zone 11 times, which is always positive, especially when you're playing with Odell Beckham and things. Granted, Beckham got hurt, but Evan Ingram, should be a decent red zone target, and he was still targeted 11 times. And another stat that I found that was pretty good, he had 287 yards after the catch, which was good for 23rd in the NFL, according to playerprofiler.com. So those were all things that I looked at that I think, you know what, if this guy carries this stuff over into 2018, he should be in line to have a pretty solid fantasy season. And if he does all those things, then $6 is going to be a very good price for a player like that. So if we move on to the defending Super Bowl champion, the Philadelphia Eagles, this is a team that I'll say kind of before I start delving in here, to me, they're hard to put or hard to find any good values. We'll say obviously they have quality players, but we'll start with a guy like Alshon Jeffrey, who's at $33. To me, that's a bad value. If you have a wide receiver in the range of this low end wide receiver too, I feel like you should be trying to get a player for around $25 or less at that point. I feel like most of us, if we rank our wide receivers and we start getting into wide receiver 20 territory to 24, we would have a lot of names oftentimes that would be put up above somebody like Alshon Jeffrey. And at their price point, then to me, that's a guy that you want to target. Like I have Alshon as my wide receiver 21, which, he, like I said, he fits in that wide receiver 2 range. But at $33, when he's right there with guys like Golden Tate, Allen Robinson, Marvin Jones, those guys go for so much cheaper that if I'm getting that same type of production, why would I want to spend it on the most expensive guy in that spot? And right now, Alshon Jeffrey is that guy. Like I said, and there's just so many players in that range. You don't want to be overpaying. At $33, that puts him in the range of guys like Diggs and Doug Baldwin, both of which I would rather have. I would even much rather go grab Larry Fitzgerald, who I have ranked considerably higher. He's in my top 10, and he goes for $25. To me, you get a much safer floor and probably as high of a ceiling, maybe higher. He's going to get targeted a lot, Alshon will, but he showed in 2017 that he's just inefficient with some of those targets. He was 95th in the NFL in catch rate at 47.5%. That's pretty bad for a wide receiver 1 on a prolific offense. So again, there's just a lot of reasons why I'm kind of fading Alshon Jeffrey right now at that price. In terms of bargains, like I said, I don't really see any bargains. I look at a guy like Jay Ajayi at $15. To me, Ajayi just has too many question marks that, $15 is usually kind of in that RB20 price range. And for me, that's just too high for a guy there that has as many question marks in terms of usage and potentially durability. I mean, he's shown to be a little more durable than I think a lot of people thought. But with the Eagles, they brought in LeGarrette Blount. What's he going to do in the red zone? We hear Corey Clement's name mentioned a little bit. If a guy like that ever emerges, then obviously that's going to cut into Ajayi's workload. He's just a guy for me that I just can't feel comfortable with. So I'm probably going to be avoiding oftentimes. Same goes with Nelson Aguilar. He's at $9. Again, I look at that price and can he be productive? For sure, there's no doubt. But at $9, I just feel like there are better options, or even better, for much cheaper than that, there are options that are going to be as good as him. So there's just, to me, no point in spending $9 on a player like Nelson Aguilar. Unless you really firmly believe that he's poised for a breakout. And I don't know, with as many mouths as they have in that offense, I just have a hard time seeing that. But, obviously if they get a couple injuries in training camp and his price doesn't change, something maybe you want to monitor. The one I look at is maybe Zach Ertz. He's at $27. I know for us, we often advocate for going cheap at tight end. Depending on your league format, I will say that if you can get one of these top guys, I feel like this is a year where you would get a decent weekly advantage. Tight end is such a muddled mess that if you can get a Gronk, a Kelsey, an Ertz, that you do probably get a fairly decent statistical advantage on a lot of the tight ends that you're going to be playing against every week. So if you want to spend at tight end, to me, Ertz is a guy you could target because he does go for almost $8 to $10 cheaper than Gronk's and Kelsey's and things like that. So, like I said, if you went that route, he could be construed as a value. For us, he's our consensus tight end 3. And that price, that $27, to me, that is a fair price for a tight end in that spot. So I don't think it's necessarily a screaming value, but like I said, if you go that way, he's probably a better option at his price point than potentially Gronk and Kelsey. All right, last team here in this division would be Washington. One player I find myself going after a fair amount is Darius Geis, and right now he's at $15. To me, the value is right on. But what I like about him is targeting a guy like this is my RB2, and not even my RB2, but like guys, maybe 2 or 3 players like him as my RB2, and then I can pick the hot hand. But to me, there's a lot of upside there. And at $15, if he ever does become the 3-down back, maybe Thompson doesn't come back from his injury, or maybe he gets injured again, then to me, you've hit a home run. If he ends up scoring 10 rushing touchdowns and gets a ton of goal line work, which wouldn't surprise me, then again, I think that you're playing with a lot of house money here. And if you spend big on your RB1, these are probably the players, this $15 running back, that you're going to have to look to target later on in your drafts. And we know Jay Gruden has always liked to run the ball, going back to when he was the OC in Cincy. He's always stressed O-line play. And to me, O-line should be improved in Washington. I don't think it was terrible last year. They just were hurt a lot. They missed a lot of man games due to injury. And if they can kind of heal up and get a lot of those guys playing, then I think that Geis should be able to find some decent amount of running lanes here. And like I said, if he can ever get a 3-down role, whether it's through injury or whether it's he can show that he is really, really talented in the passing game, and some people believe that he is, others kind of criticize that in the draft process, that he didn't really show that at LSU. I personally think he's going to be a pretty competent pass catcher. So I don't mind, taking him, because I think that he does have a chance to catch a few passes and maybe push Chris Thompson aside a little bit. To me, the value on this team, though, is Jamison Crowder at $6. I'm a little bit surprised by that because I've heard his name touted quite a bit in a lot of fantasy football circles, and it's that he's still sitting around $6. I guess that hasn't necessarily got through to the masses yet. So if you're drafting sooner rather than later, you could still get a really good price on this. I'm worried that the hype will build, and he maybe will start to price himself out of this value status. But for me, he's our wide receiver 31, and players in this range typically go for around $15. And if you can get a guy like this for $6, then again, there seems to be some inherent value right there. And if you look at kind of what's going on with this team, I mean, Alex Smith is the new quarterback. Does he go back to kind of checking things down, working with a more, short to intermediate route tree? We saw last year that he had success going deep, but I don't know if Washington has the personnel to play that type of game. And I'm not sure if Jay Gruden wants to call that type of game. So I could see Jamison Crowder getting used a lot across the middle. Plus Alex Smith, really, he's only had that much success throwing the ball vertically in one season. I think it's a lot to ask a quarterback to especially at his age, to just all of a sudden become that type of passer. I feel like he's bound to regress maybe a little bit to his mean. So yeah, again, to me, it makes Jamison Crowder a lot more of a value. heading into our drafts this summer. So that wraps up the NFC East. Like I said, if you've got any questions or want to talk about some players that I didn't mention, or even just want to keep tabs on some of these guys and see how their AAVs change kind of as the summer progresses, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. You can find me there at Slim for MVP. Hope you enjoyed this, and good luck in your drafts, and stay tuned for the rest of the NFC coming very shortly.